Boy, oh boy, is the NBA back. And it's back in a big way. I don't know about you guys. I thought last night was perfect. We'll break it down here in a minute, but from everywhere from the peaceful protest at the beginning to the games in between to the way it looked on TV, it was all perfect. And we'll get to that here in a minute. It is the JMULL Show. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday. The end of the week, we made it. Thank you for being a part of another week at 110sportsmedia.com. You know, it's not that I wasn't allowing myself to get excited, because I definitely was. It was hard to not let myself get excited, but I wasn't going to get giddy until it actually happened. There was too many things that could ruin the return of any sport at this point. And it looked like, a couple weeks ago that unless something drastically changed that we were going to have basketball. But it took me until basically the broadcast started last night to get really excited about the NBA returning, and boy, oh boy, did it deliver. We'll talk about that here at the top of the show. At 11:20, we'll talk about the games that are on the slate today. There are some things that are slightly more important, just some interesting games, because, it's like any season. You have the return, the two games, the high-profile games, opening day game on the actual first day of the season, but then the next day is when there are a lot of games, and you really get to dive deep into it. So there are 6 games today, and 6 or 7 games today, and they're all going to be awesome. We'll break down some of the more important ones, some of the things that are on the line, some of the things that have big impact on the standings as a result of last night, some other things, and then we'll do the podium and FYI and get out of here. But I want to start with the return of the NBA, long-awaited return of the NBA. It was perfect. It really was. There was nothing. There was very little, if anything, that I would have changed about last night. We'll start with, at the very beginning, the powerful message, sent by Meek Mill and the rest of the NBA. It was one of solidarity, one of togetherness, one of influence, and it was, the players and the Players Association have, from the jump, been very big on, listen, if we're going to do this, we're going to stay at the forefront of racial and social injustice, civil injustice, and us playing basketball and returning to the court is not going to make that go to the background in the back of everybody's mind. And it's not that I didn't think they would do it, but it was a very strong message that they were sending before the Pelicans Jazz game. If you didn't see it, every player, referees included, every coach from both teams kneeling along the sideline during the national anthem, locked arm in arm over, arms over each other's shoulders. It was one NBA unit. You had opponents kneeling together and referees, everybody that makes up an NBA game. And that's, for me, one of the more powerful parts about it is that it wasn't the Pelicans and the refs and the Jazz. It was one body of people representing the NBA and what they want the bubble to be about and what they are standing for when it comes to racial injustice in this country. And right at the center, it was Quinn Snyder and Alvin Gentry locking arms together. That's the most powerful symbol you can get, apart from maybe, two absolute rivals that hate each other locking arm in arm, but two coaches that are there to beat each other, that have spent the last 3 days, I guess when you have your first game, you've been scheming for a week because you just have that ability to. But two guys that had come there with their teams, with their squads to beat the other team, But before that happens, uh, they took a moment during the national anthem, during the absolutely beautiful video that was sort of narrated and led by Meek Mill. It really was incredible. It was very impactful, and it was a delivering of what the NBA said that they wanted to do, and the advantage they wanted to take of the stage they were going to have to make an impact. And then it was a constant reminder on the court. You have Black Lives Matter on the court. You have players with say their name, equality, enough, so on and so forth on the back of their jerseys. The back of Mike Conley's jersey says "I am a man," and everybody's shoes. You said, be the change, show the change. We need change. We've had enough. All kinds of things being written on shoes being designed. It's not just a magic marker. Shoes designed to be a part of that message that the NBA was trying to send. It really was incredible. It really was, and it was a perfect beginning to a night that really had no hiccups. It was great. I mean, Ian Eagle and Stan Van Gundy were phenomenal on the call, and then you had Kevin Harlan and Reggie Miller on the late game, on the sort of the primetime game between the Clippers and the Lakers. Both teams were great. Both commentating teams were great. You had really intense basketball, and I was really glad. I was really glad that it felt like a regular season NBA game, and that in the Clippers Lakers game in particular, it got to the point where it felt like a playoff game, and that was something I was a little worried about because the scrimmages, well, they felt like scrimmages. The intensity wasn't there, and I wasn't worried that the intensity wouldn't be there when the games actually started to mean something. I was just worried that we weren't going to be able to tell on TV that things were getting intense. And that wasn't the case. I could tell that things were getting intense, and it felt like an NBA regular season game that was between two really good teams, talking about the Clippers Lakers here, that have a rivalry that has been manifested by the fact that 4 of the 10 best players in the NBA now play in LA. I mean, that made me really happy as well, because it felt like a really important NBA regular season game. And right now that's all we can ask for, and I'll assume that since that game felt very similar to the way an NBA regular season game feels with fans in the stands, that the same can be said for the playoffs, and we'll feel that intensity when we get to that part of the season as well. That's my hope, and after last night, I'm very confident that will be the case. And we've talked about this earlier this week after the scrimmages were on TV, and we got to see what this was actually going to look like broadcasted. But the arena setup is spectacular. It really is. It's a perfect balance. I've realized for me that there's this perfect balance when it comes to televised sports. It's a perfect balance between knowing something is on the sidelines and in your peripherals, but it's not so out of place, it doesn't feel so weird that you want to spend the entire time looking at it. Because that was the thing with, the cardboard cutouts behind home plate in baseball games, they're so obvious that they're just cardboard cutouts, and they're so detailed just as a result of the camera shot that it's hard to not look at them, and it's almost the inverse effect. And instead, maybe you get a chuckle out of a foul tip that hits the backstop, and the guy sitting in the front row loses his beer because he gets startled by the ball. That's funny, but at least for me, other than that, I spend no time looking at what's happening behind home plate. I just know that there are people there, there's some movement, and it just feels natural instead of the same 3 people staring at me with with the same smile for 3 hours and 9 innings. It's a little off-putting. We talked about that on Monday, but what they did with the virtual fan experience, with there's a template of stadium chairs, and it's people's Zoom call cutouts on the screen. And I thought that was so, just the little movement I thought was so important, and made it feel so, not real, but it made it feel natural, and more importantly, from a peripherals perspective, it made the screen whole, and it made it feel like the screen wasn't missing anything. And that's just something that, not to baseball's fault at all, but something that baseball just is going to have to deal with. Is it's always going to feel like there's something missing in the arena. For me, you're able to put your all-stars in the stands. I mean, you had Damian Lillard watching the game, and that's awesome. But so you're able to put some guys in the stands, some actual real people, and then you've got this virtual fan experience that really lends itself to looking good on TV. And I think even without those fans, I think it still looks pretty good on TV. I think the screens are a really good idea, and the camera angles are very calculated so that you're not constantly being reminded that there's nobody else in the building. I thought it was great. I thought I wasn't surprised that it looked great on TV, because the scrimmage games looked really good as well, but it looked even better with some of the technology that they were using on TV, and putting people in the stands, so to speak, was really awesome. And then on top of it, it felt like real games that were important and not just scrimmages, which made me really, really happy. From a optics standpoint, it looked great. It felt great. The message was beautiful, and it was a community of one, a community of many people bringing one message about what the NBA is about when it comes to social injustice. And then you had these games. So let's talk about these games. So you had Utah and New Orleans to start the night. And first of all, these games were decided by a total of 4 points. One bucket each way decided these games. And that really, really doesn't hurt. Having two games that were must watch until the final seconds, I thought was a really big deal. Just so nobody was talking on TV about, well, these games are boring. Well, it's the third quarter and you feel like you don't have to watch anymore. I thought that was a really big deal, and it certainly doesn't help that both games came down to the final possession, essentially. So in Utah, you had the Jazz beat the Pelicans 106-104. Couple things I want to get to here. First, Zion Williamson went 6 of 8 from the field for 13 points, but had 0 rebounds, 0 blocks, 0 steals, and only played 15 minutes and had a plus or minus of -16, the worst of any player that played in the game last night. There are a couple things here. I mean, we knew that he was going to play in short bursts, but it looked like, he would play for 3 or 4 minutes, be electric for 3 or 4 minutes, and then go and be catching his breath. I know he wasn't, but he was healthy enough to play 19 games before the NBA season got suspended. So you can't tell me that he spent the last 4 months trying to get completely healthy if he was healthy enough to play 19 games back before the season was suspended. My point being is that this is a perfect opportunity to get in shape. And yes, there's an argument that every offseason is a perfect opportunity to really get in incredible shape. That's an absolute fair point to make. But there's an even bigger motivation, because, okay, it's get in shape and we're immediately fighting for the playoffs. Get in shape and I can change the game for our team and we can make a run in the playoffs. Jokic. Embiid doesn't look any different. And I mean, it's a little different for Embiid because Embiid is the best big man in the NBA, the best center true big man, looks like a true big man in the NBA right now. I mean, we saw Anthony Davis last night. I mean, that guy is incredible, and we'll get to them and in the LA game here in a minute. But if he's not gonna get in great shape when there's literally nothing else to do, literally nothing else to do, not a whole lot of vacation going on, not a whole lot of, just painting the town going on. Like, there are so few distractions right now that it's really incredible that he's that he looked like he needed 10 minutes to catch his breath after playing 3 or 4 minutes. And for a guy whose athleticism and explosiveness is such a big part of his game, you gotta find a way to stay on the floor more. You gotta find a way to be that explosive and not get gassed quite as quickly. He played 15 minutes. He scored 13 points on 6 of 8 shooting in 15 minutes. In theory, if you're able to get up to 27 minutes, then you're up to 24 points. And the Pelicans win this game. It's disappointing. It really is. If he wants to make as big of an impact as he can on that Pelicans team, he has to get in shape. He has to. If he wants to play NBA level defense, he has to get in shape. I've never seen somebody so explosive and so dominant that's so out of shape. If you're gonna, the reason Russell Westbrook can play like a maniac like he does for 42 minutes because he's in incredible shape. If Zion wants to play explosive and as exciting as he does, then you have to get him in shape. He has to get in shape or it's not going to work. Because your best player, the best, most gifted player on your team is only playing 15 minutes a game because he can't be him for longer than that. And that's really, really unfortunate. But we'll see, of course, he talked about needing to get into the flow of the game. He had 13 points in 15 minutes and made a really nice pass and transition. The flow of the game is fine. You need to get in shape. And you need to do it. But, at this point, I mean, if Memphis wins today, and we'll get to this in the second segment, if Memphis wins today, then you're 4.5 games back, and you just have to, to even have a chance, you have to be better than the Grizzlies for those next 7 games. You have to be better than the Grizzlies to even have a chance because you have to be within 4 games. So at the very least, he's got to be in shape for next season. At the very least. Utah is going to be a lot of screen with Rudy Gobert. They got a lot of ball handlers. Jordan Clarkson, Donovan Mitchell, Mike Conley. All 3 of them were good last night. They had 63 points combined. Mike Conley looked healthy for the first time in a long time. But without Bojan Bogdanovic, who was really their only, you've got Joe Ingles, but in terms of a guy who is averaging 20 points a game and doing it without the ball in his hands a lot, that guy was Bogdanovic. And without him, it's going to be a ton of screen and roll with Gobert and ball handling and just hoping that you can create enough shots to score enough points so that you actually can win a game. And the issue with, Royce O'Neal did a pretty good job on Zion, but the biggest question still for me is who guards the best perimeter players on the other team? Because I don't know what the answer to that question is. They play Oklahoma City next, and that's a game I think that matches up well for Utah. It's an important game as well because those 2 teams are right. Utah is one of the teams that Oklahoma City is trying to catch. But that's the biggest question for me still, and it wasn't really answered because Zion wasn't on the floor very much. And Royce O'Neal did a pretty good job on him while he was there, but, Zion still scored 13 points in 15 minutes. A great game. Utah and New Orleans. It really was. I'd like to see more out of Brandon Ingram. JJ Redick was awesome. He was playing like a guy that has a playoff streak in jeopardy. Unfortunately, it got a little harder for him to achieve that goal with that loss last night. As for LA, the LA backcourt was good enough, and we've talked about that a lot. The LA backcourt was good enough. Tavius Caldwell Pope, Alex Caruso, and Dion Waiters were combined combined for 24 points, 6 assists, 8 rebounds, and a plus minus of plus 32 combined. That's good enough. And it's gonna be a different question when they play a team with gifted offensive guards, because that's the biggest question for me is how do those guards look on defense? Because the Clippers are an elite basketball team, but the only guard that they have that really terrifies you on the offensive end, that's Lou Williams. Didn't play last night because he's still being quarantined. And Montrezl Harrell didn't play either, which is the other part of that duo in the pick and roll that really makes you scared if you're the Lakers in a series, when you really have to play great defense on Lou Williams or he can swing that series. Listen, the Lakers won by 2 last night without Montrezl Harrell and Lou Williams on the floor. The Clippers didn't have 2 of their guys that I think will be there in crunch time. That's a big deal. I think if Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell are there, that the Clippers win that game last night. And then then we're kind of having a different conversation here. But last night, the guards, the puzzle pieces of guards that the Lakers are trying to put together to make up for the absence of Rondo and Avery Bradley was good enough last night. We'll see if that changes, if we feel differently about that, when the Lakers play Utah on Monday, when they play Toronto on Saturday with Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet. That's when we'll really have an answer. How good is that team on defense to allow them? How good is that team on defense with those guards? We'll see. The other thing is Anthony Davis is officially the biggest problem for the Clippers. I mean, LeBron is always going to have a tough time just because you can put Kawhi on him, and then when he gets tired, you can put Paul George on him. Those are 2 of the 3-4 best defenders, arguably the 2 best perimeter defenders in the NBA right now. And both of them will spend time on LeBron. Neither of them are going to spend a whole lot of time on Anthony Davis. And but who's the next guy? I mean, it'll be interesting to see if Harrell spends a lot of time on him when they play again, if they play again. I don't know if they play them again in the 8 games. I don't think they do, but I'm not positive about that. Not positive about that. We can do some looking here, but I'm pretty sure they don't play again. The point being, though, is that if they play in the playoffs, it'll be interesting to see what Harrell can do against him. But there's nobody else on that team that can do anything against him. When we're talking about Zubac, Patrick Patterson, JaMychal Green, and Joakim Noah. As a result, Anthony Davis had 34 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, shot 17 free throws because nobody could stay in front of him. So they're just sort of playing catch-up the entire game. He's getting fouled, and he's going to the line. He's knocking down 16 of 17. He only knocked down 8 shots in the game, 8 of 19. That's not exactly great. But when you're getting to the line 17 times, it's plenty. Kyle Kuzma was good, 16 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists in 32 minutes. But Anthony Davis is going to be a problem for the Clippers, and that's going to be the guy on the offensive end that is most important for the Lakers in a 7-game series against the Clippers, because he's just the guy with the biggest advantage, not LeBron. Asking LeBron to put up 35 a game in a series when he has to deal on both ends of the floor with PG and Kawhi Leonard is a really tall ask. A really tall ask. But Anthony Davis not quite, clearly has the advantage, specifically on the offensive end, of the floor because the Clippers just don't have that guy. I mean, not very many teams, if any, have the guy to guard Anthony Davis. But there are certainly guys that would do a better job than the guys that the Clippers put on the floor last night. It was an absolutely great return for the NBA. It really was. Just real quick, any chance the Lakers had of coughing up the 1 seed is pretty much gone. And now if Denver beats Miami on Saturday, we're talking about Denver and Miami and the Clippers being separated by half a game for the 2 seed. And that's an interesting race that we'll keep an eye on as we get closer and closer to the end of the season to see if the Clippers can hold on to that 2 seed. Coming up next, we'll talk about the games that are happening today, Friday, July 31st. We'll see what's popping today in Orlando in the bubble. We'll do that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday. It's the end of the week. The NBA season's back. The MLB is in shambles. We'll get to that here in a minute. But thank you for joining us on the JMULL Show, making us a part of your day. 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. The restart of the NBA season was great. It really was. It was everything I was hoping it would be, and honestly more. And we've got even more going today, and in many ways, I'm more excited about today than I was about yesterday. It's a great feeling. I mean, it's 10:31. We got games in 90 minutes. Games starting in 90 minutes. We're starting with, I believe, the Magic and the Nets. And here's the thing: the Magic and the Nets are 1:30. So we're still 3 hours away, but still, the point is the same. That it kind of feels like the first and second round of the NCAA tournaments. I mean, today it's 1:30, Saturday it's noon, Sunday it's 1, Monday 12:30, Tuesday 12:30. I mean, that's all, and then you got games through the end of the night essentially. 8 p.m. seems to be the latest game. 8 p.m. Central is the latest game. That's awesome. I love that. Um, on the docket today in the bubble, you got Orlando versus Brooklyn. That's interesting because Brooklyn is currently half a game up on the Magic in the 7 and 8 seed down the bottom of the Eastern Conference. The 7 seed doesn't have to play Milwaukee in the first round. That's a really big deal. I think the Magic will not have an issue jumping the Nets just because the Nets are really really short-handed. You got really nobody that is of importance playing for the Nets in the bubble. They're putting barely an NBA team on the floor. I think the Magic will win that game and ultimately hold on to the 7 seed. Memphis and Portland, Phoenix, Washington, Boston, Milwaukee, Sacramento, San Antonio, and Houston and Dallas. Let's start with Memphis and Portland. With New Orleans losing last night, they went from 3.5 games back to 4 games back of the Grizzlies for the 8 seed. And here's the thing: if the Grizzlies win today, the Pelicans lose another half game, of course, and the Blazers also lose a full game. So all of a sudden, the two teams that me personally, and I think most people think are the two biggest threats to the Grizzlies to, even if it's just in the playing game, to grab that 8 seed away from them, are the Pelicans and the Blazers. So you go from 3.5 games back, and the other interesting part of this is that Sacramento and San Antonio play today too. So if San Antonio wins, then you've got a team that remains 4 games back of the Grizzlies. Then Sacramento would also be 4.5 games back. And then all of a sudden, you've got this massive gap between the Grizzlies and the 8 seed and the rest of the Western Conference that are trying to track down the 9 seed. And even more interestingly enough, then you've got those 3 teams in particular, the Kings, Pelicans, and Trailblazers, who have to be better than the Grizzlies in those 7 games to even get the play-in game. And San Antonio would have to be equally as good in the last 7 games. Because the playing game only happens if the 9 seed is within 4 games of the 8 seed. There's a very real chance that by the end of the day today, nobody is any closer than 4 games of the Grizzlies. And first of all, it would be really, really hard for the Grizzlies to mess up bad enough to lose the 8 seed. They could, in my opinion, pretty much lock up the 8 seed today if things fall correctly. And then Memphis plays San Antonio, and then Memphis plays New Orleans. So this could also go really badly for the Grizzlies, but New Orleans, I mean, the Grizzlies were massive Jazz fans last night because the Pelicans had to take another step back. And that's a big deal in this sprint, and I'm so sick and tired of hearing people say that word, but it's a sprint, these 8 games. And when it comes to a sprint, it's a lot harder to make up ground than it is in a marathon. And that's what happened to New Orleans last night, and the Grizzlies have a really good chance to put the other team that is really threatening to them, and the Trailblazers, back a big step as well, and put pressure on those teams instead to be better than the Grizzlies so that they actually get a chance to play the Grizzlies in that play-in game. Boston, Milwaukee, this one doesn't necessarily have a lot of standings impact. I mean, the Bucks are going to be the 1 seed. They could go 0-8, and I'm pretty confident they'd still get the 1 seed because it would force Toronto to go 7-1, and I'm not sure that's going to happen. Not to mention that the Bucks aren't going to go 0-8. Boston is 2.5 games ahead of Miami right now and a full 3 games behind the Raptors. So winning this game, I don't think Boston is going to finish anywhere other than 3rd. So that it doesn't really matter from that standpoint. But there are a couple questions that I want answered today. The first being, how does Boston guard Giannis? Do they guard him like it's a regular season game? Because here's the thing, they're not gonna. I don't think they'll actually pull out all the stops for Giannis that they might pull out in a 7-game series. Because one of the most intriguing things about Boston is that they have so many guys that they can put on Giannis and feel pretty good about it. You've got Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, which I think would get the bulk of that responsibility. Gordon Hayward can eat up some minutes if you need him to, just because he's another big body who's a willing defender. But it could also just be a game where they let Giannis go for 34, 37, and just try and lock down everybody else, which is kind of what happens anyways. That we don't actually see anything different than what we would just see in a regular season game. You also get the answer of what kind of Jason Tatum are we getting. I don't think we can come to any. It's almost a win. It's almost an impossible situation to be the loser of when you think about Jason Tatum, because if he doesn't play great, it's the first game back, and he had to go against Giannis and Chris Middleton, who are the two best defenders on the best defensive team in the NBA. So you're not going to say, "Oh, Tatum is you write him off. It was a fluke what he was doing before the suspension. 30 points in 9 of the last 14 games he played in. And it was just a fluke. He's not ready to be the best guy on the title contender just yet." Or he could go out and score 34 against the best defensive team in the NBA, Chris Middleton and Giannis. And then we're talking about, okay, Jason Tatum is the guy. This is a Celtics team that can be really, really dangerous. Really, really dangerous. Because for me, Boston is one of those teams really high up there, in my opinion, for the team that could represent the East in the NBA Finals. We'll also get other answers about things like, how's Kemba Walker's knee? It's really concerning that after 4 months, he's basically in the same spot with that knee that he was 4 months ago. Talking about with media, in media availability in media availability with the Boston Celtics, him saying that, I'm still really frustrated that I'm feeling pain in this knee. That's bad. It really is. There's no good way to look at it. And the biggest part of that is that it's not going to change. If it hadn't changed in 4 months, nothing's going to change in the next 2.5 months when he's playing basketball every other day and really putting a lot of pressure and a lot of workload on that knee. So I'm curious to see what he looks like, because he's the biggest difference. Tatum being elite, looking like an elite player, is a big deal, but Kemba being there instead of Kyrie Irving is the biggest difference between these two, this team from the last couple seasons, and that's a big deal. And I'm curious. I want to see what that looks like, what Kemba Walker looks like in crunch time in the playoffs on a good basketball team. And then you got Houston and Dallas, which is, first of all, just really entertaining because you've got Harden, Westbrook, Doncic, KP. Who guards KP, Kristaps Porzingis, when the tallest player on the Rockets that is playing any sort of real minutes is a 6'9" guy? Kristaps is 7 feet. Now, it helps that Kristaps is not a bang around in the paint 7-footer. He really likes to, spread the floor. He's a modern NBA big. But he's still going to be really hard to guard. And you're talking PJ Tucker, who's 6'9", maybe Robert Covington. You just don't have a lot of guys that you can put on him. So it's the first real test, not the first real test. They've been doing this for a while, the Rockets, in this small ball experiment. But just, what does it look like? Is it a reminder immediately that this is just an experiment that has major holes on the defensive end? I don't know. Apparently we can barely hear me. Let me know if this is any better. I don't know why we'd be able to barely hear me. I hope I've been talking through the right microphone. That'd be really annoying. I have been talking through the right microphone. But we'll see. And the other part about this simply is what does this do to the race in the Western Conference? Because right now the Rockets are only a game and a half ahead of Dallas for the 6th seed. And the most important part of the Western Conference playoffs for the bottom half teams in the West is to avoid the Lakers and the Clippers in the first round. That 6th seed would do that for Dallas. And Dallas, I think it can be dangerous, especially against a team like Denver, when Luka gets to play against somebody that's not PG and Kawhi Leonard guarding him the entire time. And the Rockets don't want to play the Clippers for the exact same reason, because they can put PG and Kawhi Leonard on James Harden. This is one of the more interesting parts of the race in the Western Conference, in my opinion, and one that can have some bigger implications, because I think that's a really interesting series between Denver and Dallas, or Utah and Dallas. If Utah, tracks down Denver for the 3 seed, this is really interesting series. It's a lot more interesting than Dallas and LA, which is it's just clear which team's going to win that series because of what they can do, what the Clippers can do to the best player on that team. But that's the slate today. Like I said, you've got Orlando and Brooklyn, Memphis and Portland, which is one I'm certainly going to be keeping my eye on, Phoenix and Washington, which is a snooze fest in pretty much every sense of the word, Boston, Milwaukee, Sacramento, San Antonio. And that one there is interesting as well, just because those are two teams that technically still have aspirations of getting that 9 seed. If things fall right today, then San Antonio could be the team closest to the Grizzlies for the 9 spot, which is just something I didn't think would be the case. And I think, I'd probably pick San Antonio to win that game, just because they have Popovich, and the Kings are just sort of a shell of themselves. The San Antonio, because they don't have LaMarcus Aldridge, are sort of leaning into that new era lineup, lots of threes, lots of ball movement, Derek White, DeJounte Murray lineup that they can put on the floor with Jakob Poeltl, as well with just some injuries. Trey Lyles is out, as well as LaMarcus Aldridge. So there's just an interesting lineup that can be put on the floor when it comes to the Spurs that makes that game more interesting than it otherwise might be. But that's today's games. Once again, another exciting day in the NBA. Last night was awesome. Today, there are reasons to believe that today would be even better. But we'll see. We're coming up next. We'll do the podium here on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day. 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. Thank you, everyone who stopped by today. For the podium today, we have something very simple. Today's podium is my 3 favorite things from last night's NBA return that are ultimately irrelevant for personal reasons, things that will be quickly forgotten, but things that I took notice of last night. So we'll start with the bronze medal, and this is the bronze medal because this actually can be an important thing for the Jazz. But Mike Conley looked healthy last night for the first time in a long time. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, everyone has that player that they're attached to, and a lot of times they've been hurt for an extended amount of time, and then there's that game where you see that they just, wow, he hasn't been healthy for a long time, because tonight he looks healthy and just looks different than he has in recent memory. And that was the case for Conley last night. 20 points, 4 assists, 7 of 16 from the field, 4 of 4 from the free throw line, plus 12, plus or minus. You know, he looked, there was just more lift on his shots. He was getting up quicker, he had better touch around the rim. You know, his 3-point shot looked better. It was, you know, it's a good thing for the Jazz, especially with Bogdanovich out. I mean, if Conley doesn't play well night in and night out, they don't have a chance to win a series in the playoffs, in my opinion. But if he plays well and they get a team similar to what they got last night, I think it's certainly a tough out in the first round, just because they have a lot of experienced players, specifically Conley, and they have a really great coach in Quinn Snyder, who is one of the better coaches in the NBA. But the bronze medal going to my man Mike Conley for just being healthy and actually looking healthy and taking advantage of the 4 months he got to get his body right and really be healthy, which it didn't look like he was all season, not completely at least. The silver medal. It was cool seeing players just chilling in the stands watching the games. I didn't expect this to be something that I really took notice of, but just seeing Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum chilling in the stands watching a basketball game, it had a very summer league vibe to it. It had, you know, you see celebrities and athletes show up to NBA Finals games. You'll see NBA players every once in a while at finals games, but it's certainly not something, just because everybody's playing, of course, in the regular season, they're not spending their time going out of their way to go to other teams' basketball games. And when everybody's in the same place, and quite frankly, they've probably exhausted the things that there are for them to do in the bubble already, go and watch some basketball. And seeing those players in the stands was actually really, really cool, and added to the peripherals of the stands. I mean, they had real people in the stands to put the cameras on, which is an underrated thing, but I think helpful, just to have different camera movements and have it not feel stationary on the screen. But the gold medal by a mile is the fact that Rudy Gobert scored the first points of the NBA restart. Rudy Gobert is at the epicenter of the sports world shutting down. You know, March 11th, I believe it was, he tested positive for COVID-19. That game against the Thunder gets shut down. And then by Friday, March 11th was a Tuesday, I think, maybe a Wednesday. And by Friday, everything was shut down. That was conference tournament week for college basketball. By Friday, everything was shut down. The NCAA tournament was gone. My school had gone online, and eventually had gone online for the rest of the semester. the ball really got started with Rudy Gobert, and to see him make an and one to start the restart in Orlando was very circle of life-ish and made me laugh how incredibly appropriate that was. That okay, Gobert is cool with us starting. Gobert scored. We can go back to playing basketball, and of course it's not that simple. But Gobert's actions being the ones that really put a halt to this thing. It makes me laugh that his actions were the first points of the restart in Orlando. That certainly made me laugh. We're not going to go to a break. We're just going to jump right into FYI to close out the show here. First, Mike Golic and Wingo, Mike and Mike in the Morning, whatever you know him as, the 22-year ESPN radio veteran, had his last radio show today. You know, he's an absolute legend in the world of radio, and there are times that I was a fan of him. There was times that I was not so much a fan of him. But either way, he's a really big part of the history of ESPN, the history of sports radio. Last show today, I don't know if you've seen the clips from his show on Twitter, you know, with his entire family sitting around him. If you haven't, you should. It's pretty touching. But Golic, a radio legend, and his last show today was pretty touching, and the end of an absolutely crazy ESPN radio career. Just, you know, being on radio that consistently for that long is impressive, because radio is a pretty fickle profession, and seeing anybody do it for that long, I mean, we could take a look at everything, how different the lineup is for radio and how many different shows came and went while Golic was on the air, basically without interruption. The MLB postponed more games today. Lots more games today, actually. The Brewers' home opener against the Cardinals has been put on hold as a result of as far as the last time I looked, it has not been disclosed who the player was that tested positive. But listen, the MLB made a really big mistake with the Marlins. Made a really big mistake, and thankfully today there was more reports that the Phillies had no new positive coronavirus tests, which is great. That's really good news, and it doesn't look like in particular that mistake from Rob Manfred in Major League Baseball, it doesn't seem like that mistake is going to look catastrophic, at least not any more catastrophic than it looked when that news broke. But Major League Baseball postponed 31 games this week. 2 teams reported players with COVID-19 tests, and it's causing a ripple effect. Listen, we can have a conversation about if it's an overreaction. There are 2 parts to this. One, this is absolutely what Major League Baseball had to do from a marketing and public opinion standpoint. They couldn't mess it up again. They had to be able to say, look, we took major precaution this time around, and when there were positive tests, we shut games down. But what this also says is that there can't be 31 games postponed every week if you want to actually finish this season. And believe me, and I've talked about it on this show a lot, I'm never going to be the guy who gets mad because games are being postponed because players are testing positive. Players' health is far more important than any season being completed and any game being played. So you're never going to hear anything from me about that. But there's just some logistical impossibilities if we were canceling 31 games every week. You had 66 days to play 60 games. Like, what are you going to... And baseball is adamant that they're not going to play into November. We're getting very close already to that being... to them playing into November being an inevitability if they're going to finish this season. Because I promise you, this will not be the last set of games that are postponed. It won't be. It might not even, we might get more games postponed this week. Because right now, how Major League Baseball reacted or didn't react to what happened with the Marlins. They put themselves in a situation where they had to respond this way, and they're going to have to keep responding to it this way. And it's going to result in so many games being canceled. And, there's an argument that because players are traveling like this and because it's a team sport that doesn't have a lot of contact but has enough contact, that there's an argument that every time a guy tests positive that you have to be really thorough, and being really thorough means postponing games, especially when they're happening so close together. I mean, there are teams that will play 6 games in 6 days, play two series because they're trying to cram it all in, and that's just logistically impossible to make sure everybody is healthy when it comes to, because you don't get tests back immediately, and that's really tough because it's impossible to make sure that the guy you tested on Monday morning didn't test positive for COVID-19 prior to that Monday evening game, because you're not getting the test back until Tuesday morning. Even though that's really fast, it's just the logistical part of this, especially when teams are traveling. There's so many more variables to take into account, and not enough time to take them into account. So we'll see what actually happens. I'm skeptical at this point that the season will actually finish, but we'll see. And finally, per usual, it's the end of the week, but I'll be back on Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern. On Tuesday, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring, and that's at 11 a.m. Eastern as well on Tuesday. And Chris Brown, Around the Bases. I'm sure he'll talk about this. Hopefully there's still baseball to talk about. If not, he'll be talking about the suspension of the season, whatever it might be. That's at 1 p.m. Eastern. Those 2 shows are on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The JMULL Show Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Guys, enjoy your weekend. Watch a lot of basketball. I know that's what I'm going to do. We'll meet back here, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. We'll meet back here 11 a.m. Eastern on Monday, and I'll see you then.